Hello, I'm Omid Jalili. I'm not really. I'm Ricky Gervais. I'm not. I'm Hardeep Singh Kohli. And welcome to Tour of Duty. It's not often I'm this thrilled to meet a fellow stand-up, but and rather embarrassed, because 2 years ago, Mr. Mark Watson, I said hello to you in the street in Edinburgh because I was so excited to see you, because I'm such a fan of your radio work and your work generally. And I just realised I've done that terrible thing folk do of saying hello to someone they don't know and assuming you're going to say hello back. I'm sorry about that.
But of course I did know who you were because of your own work, so we had a series of awkwardnesses to sort of cut through there. Basically, but I thought, A, I don't know this guy. B, but it is Hardeep Singh, I know who he is. So C, what sort of conversation are we meant to have? In fact, it's lucky we've got a formal arrangement like this now.
I know.
Our relationship really needed this.
Yeah, and I feel that we can really, move on from this juncture and see, if
this is probably the day when the healing starts, I reckon.
Yeah. I'm feeling all Van Morrison all of a sudden.
Me too. I don't often put Van Morrison, to be honest.
It is genuinely lovely to meet you.
You too.
Because I really love what you do. And I was trying to, for the purposes of this chat, try and work out what it was about what you did that so engaged me, because we are not well known for necessarily appreciating other people's work and being able to relax and enjoy it without kind of go, I wish I did that, I wish I did that.
No, it's quite difficult, especially in the festival. It's very difficult to not do that. Yeah,
but I think it's your affability more than anything else.
I do get called affable a lot.
You do. I'm sorry for not being original.
No, I'm happy with it. I think I sort of almost pride myself on it, really. I like to think that if you watch a comedian, you come to like them, whereas quite a few comedians that pretty much seem to make enemies out of the audience on purpose.
But this is what's interesting. I don't know whether you've knowingly or with a degree of awareness bucked that trend, because you rose to prominence very quickly at a time when it was sort of, to say hate comedy is too strong, but it was about ripping the piss. Members of the audience, and you don't do that. You apologising before you start.
I didn't consciously try and buck a trend, but I did always feel, looking at those comedians, that basically I would never be able to do that. I don't really like ripping the piss. I enjoy a bit of banter with audiences, and I'm capable of doing that sort of thing. But I've occasionally written a really mean-spirited joke, and I can just never deliver it with much conviction. I had an Anne Frank joke at one time. It wasn't that as Anne Frank jokes go, it wasn't particularly offensive. And it would just get a bit of a from the audience, but I still couldn't quite do it with 100% conviction. I think I suppose I sort of feel like the key thing I want people to feel is that we were all one sort of gang together, basically. Not in too saccharine a way. Like, I don't try and I don't want to be sort of pleading with the audience to love me, but basically I do just think that I'm all about trying to make a nice connection with the crowd. When I see a comedian sort of talking down to the audience, I do sort of think, this is funny, but these guys are paid 12 quid. There's a strange relationship. Why are you acting as if they are your enemies?
Well, it's interesting because when you, forgive me again for not being original, but when you first started, although you're Bristolian, you have Welsh parents.
I do have
you
Welsh
did your
parents,
act in a Welsh accent.
Yeah.
I found a great commonality between what some of the Scots comics do with what you were doing, which was undercutting, self-deprecating all the time.
Yeah, it came quite naturally to me because that is my personality, and the Welsh accent really went with that. It's such an affable accent as well. That is probably the word for it. It's very hard not to warm to a Welsh person when they, even the most menacing Welsh person, even when Neil Kinnock was at his most frightening, you still sort of think, we can't let the Tories do this. We can't. It's just so. So when I was doing 5-minute open spots, it was an ideal way of sort of, I would come on sometimes and say hello, and in the first 20 seconds people instinctively liked you in a way that they wouldn't if you came on looking like a recent Cambridge graduate.
You sort of, again, dealing in vast sweeping generalisations.
I do that all the time.
You are not, there is a type, the kind of the Cambridge footlightsy type, and you seem antithetical to that.
Yeah, I didn't ever really fit into that. Like, I didn't actually. It's odd that I often now get described as sort of former Cambridge footlights. I didn't really have much to do with that when I was at college, because a lot of the people who really owned that scene were, super confident, like the idea of being in the society. It's not entirely true generalisation, but a fair few of the people that have been like the head of footlights or the chairman have not gone on to become comedians particularly, because their real skill was just getting elected and stuff, which is different from. So I didn't actually do a lot. What I did do was Footlights tour show, which is what brought me to Edinburgh in the first place, and that gave me the appetite for it. So I do have a certain amount. I do owe a certain amount to that Cambridge comedy thing, but I wasn't really a part of it at the time. And certainly when I started doing stand-up, I tried to distance myself from it very quickly, because even though Footlights produces some great people, and it still is doing that, and a lot of their shows are pretty good and stuff, but still there's an antagonism towards that idea of like Oxbridge sketch comedy, which you're quite aware of when you're actually doing it. And when I became a stand-up, I remember coming down from here in 2002 or something to do must have been 2003, an open mic in Birmingham, and I was on with this really experienced, bitter old comic who was slagging off the festival. So I'd just been at the festival. He was like, "Oh, I never go to the festival. Who wants to pay 10 quid to watch some idiot straight out of Cambridge?" So I really cranked up the Welsh innocent thing. I was like, "Yeah, no, you're absolutely right." And I did encounter that attitude quite a bit, suspicion of people that had just come through the sort of collegiate, especially because, you know, over the past few years, people have come through younger and younger, and now there's a lot of people that bail out of college doing comedy. Luckily, I don't have that problem anymore. I'm A, established, and B, I look and seem quite old now. I don't seem fresh-faced anymore.
Well, it's interesting. When I did Edinburgh this year, I was preceded in my venue by Cambridge Footlights, and I think I've marked the change. I mean, they are lovely. You know what I mean? I think there has been a bit of a change in that kind of the makeup of the college. Maybe not as much.
I think they became more self-aware. I think there was a time when a Cambridge or Oxford group would sort of turn up in Edinburgh and be like, "Hey guys, we're the famous Cambridge Footlights," but experience teaches you that that's not necessarily what people want.
Well, now I want to talk about the way you write and your material, because I often work late at night writing or whatever, or reading, and I listen back to a lot of my favourite shows on the radio, and I will listen, rather than listen to something that's not good, I've listened to something that I've really enjoyed again and again.
Yeah.
And so your stuff is in that category. I've heard
nice.
the same shows again and again and again, and naturally find myself analysing them. And what you seem to do, and I've always wanted to ask you this, is you deliver as if you've almost not thought about what you're saying, but when I unpick it, I really see the kind of the through line of the writing and the craft of writing in what you do.
Yeah, I think the aim is always to, I think the aim for any stand-up is to try and do that to an extent, and make it look as if you're just spinning it off out of nowhere. And the audience kind of knows that you can't be, but there's that sort of suspension of disbelief. I think even if you see people like Ross Noble or Izzard, these incredible improvisers, you're still, I think you're sort of aware they must have planned this a bit, but if somebody does it with enough sort of gusto, you're willing to sort of believe that it's real. But with the Radio 4 and stuff like that, there's an added element, which is that you really are pretty scripted on those shows, because you have to be. But I was always determined to make it feel like a club night a bit in terms of atmosphere. I'd done stand-up on the radio before, where we've all heard stand-up on the radio where someone is basically reading it off a sheet, and it feels, however funny the jokes are, it just feels really wooden, and the audience laughs in this dutiful way. When it got to do my own show, I didn't want it to feel like that. So as much as possible, we're doing another series, in fact, after this in September, and I always try and make them kind of as shambolic as possible while still having a script. It doesn't come naturally to me to be there in front. When I first did the first series, having basically a stand-up crowd in there, but having an actual sheet that I was going through, really weird, because I was delivering these, you know, routines that on stage would be very fluid and loose, but I had to actually type them out and say, and then this pigeon flew into that. So the only way I could get around it was to more or less record it almost as erratically as my live shows. And then luckily I had a producer that was really good at making it sound coherent.
You also trade in the nicest possible way on discomfort and Pinterest pauses, which, you know, you can't really do when you're reading a script.
No, it's very difficult. Radio comedy is quite a different discipline in a lot of ways. You have to find ways of still hammering those same jokes, but as you say, you lose all of the physicality of it. What I try and do is actually not lose it. I basically am with the audience almost as physical. You can't do actual visual gags, but I try and almost like basically still do the show as if people could see it, and then trust that the radio audience kind of gets the vibe that everyone's having a good time. Yeah, I think if it sounds, I try and make the night that we record it as much like a genuine show as possible, and then hope that people listening in maybe they don't get everything, but they get a general sense that something funny is happening.
I mean, your touring show. Tell us a little about that, because it's been described as your most honest. Flaws. It's your most honest.
Yeah,
and
it's
edgiest.
It's funny. I had quite a long period of anxiety and depression and sort of mental difficulties, which naturally I've sort of made into a quite self-revelatory show this year. But then looking through the brochure, nearly every other bugger has a number of blurbs that say it's his most personal show. There's dozens of them. So I think that comedians have basically had a collective nervous breakdown, and this is the year that we all talk about it. I mean, it's been quite interesting doing it in a festival. I think when I tour with the show, it will be longer for a start. You get the whole evening, and I've got more chance to spin a narrative, and also that theatre crowd is probably more receptive to. I mean, there's still a lot of jokes in this show, but it is more of a kind of actual personal narrative, which in the 1 hour fringe format is not that easy a thing to accomplish, because you do feel the pressure to get a laugh every 10 seconds. So the shows have been interesting. When it goes
clearly
well,
where I'm going wrong, because I'm not getting any laughs in 10 minutes. But
no, well, fair enough. There's different approach. Well, actually, it's funny. Having said that, I've seen you do stuff, and I've seen people do stuff like Reginald D. Hunter. Or there are comedians who do not have that need for constant gags, and I really admire a comedian that is in control of the crowd. You've got a problem if you're not getting laughs and you're not in control. Yeah. But yeah, for me, I do have this instinct to chase the laughs, and I'm trying to not follow that as much.
It's interesting. You're doing a very personal show this year, and so am I. Mine's about love, and yours is about your own, your mental health. And I suppose, in a sense, if I have a bad show and people aren't enjoying, and I feel overexposed and vulnerable, I can go and hug my girlfriend. You have a lot more to risk, because if it doesn't go well for you. I know you're a really accomplished performer and you're desperately funny, so that's not going to happen. But you don't know that at the beginning of the show.
No, there's been a couple of shows that I haven't particularly enjoyed, and it is quite the flip side of doing a more personal, vulnerable show is obviously that if it goes badly, if it doesn't go so well, you do just feel that people are looking at you saying, "Why the hell are you talking about this?" And I mean, I've got my wife and kids who are don't really mind how it goes, so I've got someone to hug.
How old are your kids?
Plus, I've got a nice production team around me who. Now, I've got a 4-year-old boy and a tiny baby, like 10-week-old baby. So on the one hand, you've got something reassuring to go back to. On the other hand, the sense of your responsibility and pressure is enormous. And during the festival, you do feel like you're sort of playing with their futures as well.
This is the thing. My daughter, was 16. Was in Edinburgh, seeing shows, seeing friends' shows, and all the rest of it. And I was sorting her out with stuff. And she didn't want to come to my show because it's about love, and I was with her mum, and this is about her mum, but about other things. I wonder whether your awareness of what you do, as you have a 4-year-old child who's becoming, more aware of what you do and stuff. Does that change impact on what you do?
It's been a real thing for me in the past year or so, as he's become the sort of age where kids can Google. Well, he can't use Google yet, but he can select a video on YouTube, for example. If he saw a clip of me on YouTube, he probably would have the wherewithal to click on it, and stuff like that is alarming. It's made me realise that, and it's the same for you, the same for all of us now, that there comes a point where pretty much everything you've ever done and said has been archived online, and suddenly your kids by the time the baby grows up, the internet will be more advanced again, and this generation of kids will be even more accomplished in using it. So I'm constantly thinking, what body of work, because there's my books as well, and I've produced a lot of stuff which at one time it would have been quite possible to shield your kids from it until they were like 18, but not anymore. If I were 9 and my dad, instead of being a chemistry teacher, I knew I'd written books, I would have just had to look them up, but they would have just kept the books away from me. Whereas now,
you can't.
I know, literally at about 8 or 9, the kid will be able to find out almost everything about me. So I think about that a lot. I try not to let it actually change my act, because you can't perform with half an eye on who's gonna see it. In the same way that there's certain things my mum might not want me to talk about, but I just never think about my mum when I'm putting a show together. But it is a thing, definitely. It's the same with the books, the same with everything that I put out. I don't always know how people do it either. I see comedians that are really offensive or really personal, and I always think, well, what about your mum? What about your kids? Perhaps to reach a really high level of craftsmanship. You have to have this. There's that thing about your parents have to be dead before you produce your best work. I'm not looking forward to my parents being dead, but maybe a tiny part of you has to have that mentality of like, no one else exists. I'm just doing this.
It's funny. I knew Jimmy Carr through his girlfriend.
Right.
So I worked with her in telly, and then I got to know Jimmy, and I went to see Jimmy, and Jimmy would be saying things, and I'm like, you can't,
mate, you can't say that. Yeah.
But you don't know where one kind of reality ends and.
No, Jimmy is perhaps the perfect example of someone that is able to go on stage, say hundreds of things that you never say to anyone you love, and then come off stage, have a glass of water and just be a different. I find it hard to have that sort of. Carr in particular is a very interesting specimen. The separation he's able to impose between what he says on stage and how he is. He's not that different, but he's just, when he's doing his act, he's doing his act. When he's off stage, he's off stage. I mean, I can't.
Bizarrely, he's a very generous.
He's a very nice guy. Yeah.
Off stage. Well, not so generous. So we're going to talk about tax issues. But I have to say, I'm sorry, Jimmy. You would have made that joke if you were sat here now.
Maybe not generous to the state, but yeah. Some people find it much easier than I do. I think to I have a fairly blurred line between my actual life and my on-stage persona.
Are you finding this show cathartic?
It's funny, I don't know. Yeah, if it goes well, it really is. If it goes bad, like a couple of shows on Tuesday night, I did an extra show. The main show went really well, a really lovely receptive crowd. Then the 11 o'clock show had a couple of drunk people in whom I dealt with pretty well, I think, and as a result of that, the show went on another level. So I came out of 2 back-to-back shows that have both gone great, and because of the personal nature of the show, the audience really. I did feel then a sense of triumph that I've rarely had in my. But since then, I've had 2 quite tame audiences, and I'm basically gutted again. So I think the catharsis only lasts as long as the next show, and I think this is one of the key things about Edinburgh that's challenging. The best gig in your life, you've still got to get up the next day and do the same thing. Any sense of achievement in the Fringe only really lasts until you do a show that's not as good, which is a mental way to live. What you should be doing is banking the self-esteem from the good shows and using that. But it's the same with everything. You can have as many good reviews as you want, but one bad one stings for a lot longer.
Yeah.
You have to just accept that is
you
how
don't
it goes.
Find yourself wearing your girlfriend's underwear at 4 a.m. with half a bottle of scotch done, reading the good reviews.
No, precisely.
Mark, I have been a fan of your work for pretty much as long as you've been doing it. I think you're a breath of fresh air.
Really, no, I don't think I ever actually knew that, so I'm really. You did say this briefly when we met, but
yeah,
I'm really. It's lovely of you to say it.
Absolutely smashing to meet you.
Yeah, you too.
And I'm glad we eventually did.
Thanks a lot, man.
Oh, well.
Very nice.